This time on Poll Hub, do people answer questions differently when asked on a phone versus asked over the internet? The Washington Post story suggests the answer is a definite yes. But we here at the Marist Poll aren't so sure. We've got some data to discuss about that topic. Also, we're revisiting one of my recent rants.
What is going on?
Now it looks like I might have been premature in my histrionics. Brand new Marist Poll numbers on the prospect of Russia hacking the 2018 vote. I'm going to eat a little crow. Let's get started. And hi, everybody. This is Poll Hub. I'm J.D. Dapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Lee Marigoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
So we were reading the Washington Post this week, and we read lots of news around here. We're always interested in what's going on. And there was an article about polling. And so, of course, we were all very curious, and we read it. And it sparked a bit of a conversation around here. The premise of the article, and then I'm going to stop and let you guys go at it because I want to hear this. The premise of the article is that if you ask people questions on the phone with a live interviewer saying, and how do you feel about X, Y, and Z, they could or do give you a different answer in some circumstances than if they're just answering a question via the internet. So there's the personal of somebody asking a question versus the impersonal of I'm just saying whatever I want. And the implication is they're more truthful in this one case. The argument he's making is they're more truthful to a computer than they are to a human. Who wants to jump in on that?
That's like a stab of a knife through my heart. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this.
Well, wait a second.
Okay.
Wait.
You're going to get a little controversy in this, Jay. I hope you're prepared.
Before you get on your horse.
Okay, which I have right here.
I know this is something that you hold dear to your heart. This controversy started back, I think it was 1982 with the Bradley effect. And Lee will get to that. But I did want to just throw in one thing, which is the reason why I think this developed is because this is actually a sociological concept called social desirability. In other words, every time we're communicating with one another or we get asked questions, there is a likelihood for people to want to say the quote right thing or the good thing to the person they're talking to. And in survey research, we actually call that social desirability bias because we do check to see if, in fact, when someone is asking a question, whether something about the person who's doing the interviewing gives the person who's responding the tendency to change their answer because of whom they're speaking with. And so that is something that has been studied, that is real within the scientific literature. But it kind of ends there.
Okay. Well, there's one more piece of silverware we have to put on the table here for the table setting. Okay, there's a difference in polling as people study these questions, and we're going to get to it in a second, and our gloves are going to get off very quickly. House effects, okay, versus mode effects. And that's what we're going to be talking about that very shortly.
So
house effects.
Yeah, explain.
Okay.
Just give us the lexicon.
So if you have something that's a house effect, that means one organization does things differently than another organization in terms of how they draw their sample, how they word their questions, how they do statistical adjustments and analysis of their data. These are all under the big title house effects. So my organization and your organization might have a slightly different result based on how we do all these things.
So for instance, the president's approval rating, some people just ask, do you approve or disapprove of how President Trump is doing his job in office? Other people may give you more options. Do you strongly support or do you strongly approve? Do you approve? Do you disapprove or strongly disapprove? And some people say, excellent, good, fair, poor. Rate the president.
So, but the house effect is generally consistent. That's why it's called a house effect. It's consistent across polls within an organization.
But it makes it dangerous to compare one organization with another because they're really apples and oranges.
So that's house effect. We had another one.
And then we have what are called mode effects. And that is the method that you're using to collect the data.
And that's what this Washington Post article is arguing, is that there's a mode effect.
That's right. So this has to do with, do you use live interviewers? interviewing people on landlines and mobile devices? Are you using internet as a method of data collection? Is it an interactive voice recording system, IVR? Different modes might create different results, and that's where this whole controversy takes off. Now, the social desirability obviously goes back over 30 years to the so-called Bradley effect, which was a governor's race in California before we had all these different modes.
Mayor's race.
No, it was governor.
Governor.
Yeah,
Oh,
Tom Bradley was the mayor of Los Angeles.
He was the mayor. And
I
he was
know,
running
but
for-
you're going to say you were just a child then. And that's why she let me handle the one in 1982.
Okay, well, I lived in California then, so how about I'll trump you both on that. So he was
there we go.
Tom Bradley was the mayor of Los Angeles,
And
running
ran
for
for
governor.
governor.
He was an African American,
Yes.
and he was projected to win.
And everybody thought he was going to win, and lo and behold, he didn't. And the conclusion reached, which became known in the polling literature as the Bradley effect, was that people were not going to tell you, mostly white people, that they were going to vote for the white guy when they would say they were going to vote for the black guy, and they wouldn't tell you they ultimately were going to vote for the white guy because they didn't want to appear to be racist. Now, we've had other instances of white-black elections, Mayor Dinkins in New York City, and then nationally, Barack Obama. Lo and behold, the Bradley effect, which was sworn by many people for many decades, seemed to evaporate. Nonetheless, we come up with something new now. And now we have, in this discussion, the shy Trump voter, which I think is kind of an oxymoron in and of itself. But Barb, let me let you do. You want to do a little shy Trump voter? Because I know you think
so.
They're very shy.
What's the argument that Philip Bump,
in the Washington Post,
the Washington Post
correspondent from New York,
what's
for
the
the
argument
Washington
that he
Post.
makes, and what do you think of it?
Well, the argument he's making is that when it comes to President Trump's approval rating, if you are to conduct the survey online or in a way where there is no interviewer, so the person is, in a sense, anonymously providing their answer, that Democrats are more likely to say that Trump is doing a good job than they would if they were speaking to a live interviewer. As a result, Trump's approval rating then, it does explain why Trump's approval rating would be higher on online polls than it would be if for a poll that was conducted with live interviewers.
And what do you think of that?
Anybody?
I think it's a lot of nonsense myself, and I think that we've seen that starting with the Bradley effect. This was something that social desirability became something that was a concern, and then we're seeing other evidence that suggests, like Pew organization, which is incredibly reputable, has done a very extensive, over 2,000 folks on landline and on web, and looked at the numbers and compared and contrasted and found out that, in fact, it wasn't the case. Hold everything.
Wait. That's their 2017
Yes.
study. The Washington Post also shows that and cites the Pew Research Centers, but they cite their 2015 study, which
And
was
what did the Pew
which was
poll-
actually
yeah.
the polling they did during 2014, and then compiled the analysis and results the following year. And they did at the time find some differences between how people answered on the web and the phone, but it had to do with specific topics. So, for instance, whether you were satisfied with your family life or your social life. Well, people on the web were grumpier than people who were on the phone. They asked about whether there is a lot of discrimination against African Americans, Hispanics, women, gay and lesbian people. And again, they found that there was more intensity, or I should say less intensity among people on the web.
So there's one. Let me give you an example of what we're talking about here. They found, for instance, in the question, is there a lot of discrimination? Do you think there's a lot of discrimination in the U.S. against gays and lesbians? On the web, 48% said yes. On the phone, 62% said yes. That's an 14 point. Sorry, it's a 14 point margin. That seems real. I mean, isn't that real?
Well, what's interesting is it may in fact be real, but we don't know necessarily if it's real because it's a real difference in opinion, or because the people who were responding in both of those modes were different. They also looked at favorability ratings of different people: Hillary Clinton, Michelle Obama, Sarah Palin, George Bush, and in each instance they found greater intensity of opinion for people on the web. So, for instance, Hillary Clinton had a 27% unfavorable rating on the web, but only a 19-point unfavorable rating on the telephone. So we do see a difference in mode effects sometimes in terms of intensity. So people one of the things they have found is that when people answer on the web, they just tend to answer more strongly about that particular question than they would on the telephone. And that isn't necessarily surprising if we think about how people respond, on social media, how they respond on the internet. There is a greater intensity when you're asking them. But when it comes to a lot of policy issues, when it comes to how they're rating public officials, the differences disappear, and that's the 2017 study that Lee was referencing.
And so
the one that was not quoted in this article.
That's
yes.
right. So in the first instance, where let me just fast forward because Barb wanted to know about 2017. Let me talk about some numbers then about 2017. So what's Trump approval rating? Well, 44% approval on the web, 42% on phone and with live interviewers. A statistically insignificant difference. On three other questions that dealt with President Donald Trump, the mode effect actually went in the opposite direction than the Washington Post article suggests, in that people who on the phone were actually more likely to support the Trump positions, where on the web, they're more likely to oppose them. The reverse of this so-called shy Trump voter.
And what were those questions? Just to give me one as opposed to approval.
Well, on his job approval rating, we found that there really there wasn't a huge difference about Trump. We found that his overall favorable rating was 44% on the phone and 42% on the web.
Right, but the flip ones that Lee's talking about, where they flipped, give me one of those.
Well, yeah, that he's a strong leader. 49% of people were more likely to agree on the telephone that he was a strong leader, whereas only 45% did on the web.
And that's the reverse of what the Washington Post thesis would suggest. Not a huge difference regardless, but in the opposite direction from what their argument is.
Which blows up the whole case.
Well, but also that people, if they have anonymity, are more likely to say that Trump is doing a good job, because somehow there is this sense that you can't admit that you think he is. And I think that that's a bias in and of itself.
Yeah, we're going to pound on that one in a second. I want to give you a few more numbers, and then we're going to pick up on this notion of the so-called shy Trump voter, because that's really where this whole thing is going, which we think is a little bit of a high on the Hooey side. But anyway, here we go.
High on the Hooey side.
Come on, that's a polling term. That's a technical term.
We don't want to get too wonky here.
Okay. I want this episode to be named High on the Hooey. Okay,
that's it.
May not be very searchable, but I like it.
Well, you can lobby your executive producer.
I wonder if that is something that's also now legalized in Colorado, but that's a different question. Okay, so among Republicans, and again, this is the Pew study
and people thought polling wasn't fun.
Yeah, but here we go. So the Pew study, which we think is a very, very reputable organization.
This is the 2017 one.
Doing important work here. So among Republicans and independents who lean Republican, Trump's approval rating was 7 percentage points higher on the web than on the phone. Wow, that's fun. Different this. By contrast, his approval rating was even a little bit lower on the web than on the phone among Democrats. So again, we have this kind of odd mix here of what is real and what isn't real. And I think part of it has to do with the tendency for pollsters, in a sense, to like to eat their own sometimes. And we sometimes come up, and if something looks a little different, we try to come up with ways, let's take A and B and C and we'll average them all together and we'll find out what the truth is. Well, sometimes the reality is that some polling is better mode than other polling. For example, in the case of the presidential elections, we found, as did others studying it, that the polls that were done with live interviewers using cell phones were more accurate than these other other modes were. So it's very important, and I think when we tend to do this, call it a Bradley effect, call it the shy Trump voter. Like, are they really shy? No, because a lot of people who are Trump voters, their family might be Trump supporters.
Well, they're not shy because you just read statistics that show the opposite is true in other cases. So the whole thing is bunk.
Well, I think also what's very important about the Pew study that Lee is referencing is that it takes away the house effect because Pew is doing a web survey. Pew is doing the live interview survey.
Same questions, same everything.
So it becomes a mode effect study because it's the same organization doing.
So where does that leave us?
Well, I think when we're looking and analyzing polling, you really need to look at a single organization over time if you want to get a sense of what is happening. That's not to say that you shouldn't look at a lot of organizations, but it does get very dangerous when you start trying to compare, a Pew Research study and a SurveyMonkey poll, or you're looking at a lot of
a Maris poll with a Rasmussen poll.
Because it's not just about the mode; it's also about a lot of other things that particular organization may be doing.
And if we have right now Donald Trump in the Maris poll approval rating at 38%, and you average it with the Rasmussen numbers, which are in the high 40s, you're going to get a number in the 40s, which we don't happen to believe is accurate, as does all the other folks who are doing live cell phone interviews, which is the way we think you're going to get an accurate result. So the danger in here, I guess, is be careful also to average different polls and take Barb's advice. Follow a poll over time. They may all be going in similar directions, but this gap that you're seeing between different modes may not be real.
So let me switch gears here to eat some crow. I went on kind of for me, a mini epic rant about the number of people.
A mini epic rant.
That's kind of contradictory, but I like it. So I got really crazed a couple of weeks ago about how could Americans, on the very week that the top security officials of the U.S. were testifying in front of the Congress, that Russia was not only maybe, likely, possibly going to try and influence 2018 elections. They were saying that it's happening right now, and yet we did a poll, or the poll numbers are out there that showed that most Americans didn't really
actually
think
a
that was gonna
majority, 53%, didn't think it was very likely.
Right.
And
so I was like, what the is happening? And as it turns out, we've done a poll again, and what happened?
Well, the numbers, which I'll let Barb go through, but the numbers have changed, but it hasn't been exactly an earthquake yet in terms of the differences that we saw in the previous poll.
Yeah, I mean, Americans kind of, divide right now. 48%, though, now think it is very likely or likely, and only 44% don't think that Russia is likely to interfere in our midterm elections.
But Democrats, Republicans, and independents have all moved from the previous poll. Democrats and independents more likely to think that has been an increase showing that regards to the party. Republicans a little less so, but the direction of all is the same. Even Donald Trump's supporters have gone from 15% to 33%, thinking that there's something a little fishy out there.
And part of what I got crazed about was the fact that even Democrats weren't very strongly supporting the idea that it was very likely or likely that Russia would influence midterm elections. Again, the security chiefs all said it's already happening. That's what I was so upset about. And now it turns out, now that the numbers, our latest numbers,
but we also had
later, it's 70. I'm sorry, it's a 70%
of the Democrats
now think.
Yeah.
So I think there's been a lot of movement there and an independence, and I think that I was probably reacting to numbers that had been taken, surveys that had been done prior to all of this news getting out.
Well,
I was kind of
Well, I think
ahead of
it's going
myself
to
a
be.
little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also a slow process, an evolving process, and in some way an iterative process.
Easy for
Maybe
you
I
to
should
say.
have skipped. Maybe I should have skipped that one. But in the sense that I think people have opinions and a certain level of confidence. In our elections, they certainly have very strong opinions about how the results of those elections are interpreted, and they are going about their lives and not necessarily following every twist and turn, and that's
and of course
probably
you have not
a good
only
thing.
not only do you have the intelligence community across the board saying this happened and it's likely to occur again, but you also have the Mueller Commission or the Mueller Special Counsel having charged 13 Russians with so-called meddling in our election. And
that happened in between the polls.
Yeah,
If the issue is politicized as it has been, to mean that if there was something wrong with the election in 2016, well then the logical result of that is that this is not a legitimate president. People who feel that he is a very legitimate president are going to be slow to thinking that
exactly.
That something is going to happen that's going to affect the impact.
Yeah, exactly. It feels like the reverse of what was going on with President Obama when the whole birther issue suggested that he wasn't born in the United States. Well, if you didn't like Barack Obama, you were really, really slow to get to the position that maybe, in fact, he really was born in the United States. As candidate Trump ultimately said in October, I believe, during the presidential campaign, sort of reversing his position.
So for
it's hard to move ahead. But I think the broader point here is also very, very important. And I know it's something that we feel strongly about, and that is you need to have elections which are secure, and there's probably nothing more significant, I think, in our democracy than to guarantee that the votes are going to be counted accurately without any certainly foreign international contamination. Meddling being way too weak a word in all this. If what's going on in the 7 states that we've now finding out about who were affected,
their systems were hacked actually by
then the concern has to be for the midterm elections.
It shouldn't be and it can't be a Democrat or Republican issue. And if either side politicizes this, they're really doing a disservice to our electoral system, to our democracy, and certainly to our institution of voting.
So we're going to keep asking this question, right? Because this is we've talked a lot about how focusing on one poll as a snapshot in time is, interesting, but maybe not as valuable as seeing how things move. And here's a really good case where it's only a few weeks go by, a couple of major pieces of news start to percolate and really get, into people's brains, and their opinions change. I think it's an actually really interesting case of seeing not in real time, but in a very short period of time, how opinions can change based on news. And that's really significant considering how much time and focus we all spend now on fake news and how people aren't getting real information. I think the real stuff gets out. It percolates up. It finally gets through, breaks through.
Little by little.
But it takes time.
Little by little.
So that will do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. We want to thank our excellent executive producer, Mary Griffith.
And we'd also like to extend our thanks, as we do each week, to the Roper Center archives at Cornell University, who provide us the ability to look back at some of the trend questions you've been hearing over time, over the decades. And, we have some good topics we got planned coming up, and we're going to get back into the historical archives from the Roper Center and see what's gone on before. Good group.
And send your questions, if you've got any, to pollhub@marist.edu. And either questions for us to talk about on Poll Hub or also questions to put into our surveys. We don't have all the answers on all the questions, so maybe you'll come up with a good one, and we'll get it out there in the public, and you'll hear some results. Check out Poll Hub on social media. We're at Marist Poll on Twitter, Marist Poll on Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram. You can also just say, "Hey, Alexa, play Poll Hub." And if she's cooperating, she will do so. Don't forget to subscribe.